You know, what's really cool about those intro videos is that every answer that you need for your sermon was just said. So if you missed it, I'm sorry. That was your chance. He does kind of help us by making some of our points with us on what we're going to talk about today. But I wanted to kind of read it again. I really want to just kind of really let it sink in. He does such a good job, but it says, God did not give us a small commission. He gave us a great commission. You guys know when he gave us that great commission? Right before he ascended into heaven, at the end of the book of Matthew, where he says, you know, to go ye therefore into all the land, baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I'll be with you. Remember that? You remember hearing that Great Commission is what we call it. And that is so important that they call it the Great Commission because it's such a big responsibility for us all. To go into all the world, to preach the good news of Christ's love and grace. It's not just the job of the staff at the church that you attend to be the preacher of the gospel. Jesus doesn't say, just pointing out a couple people, those of you that are called to be preachers, you go out into all the world and preach the good news. He says to everyone he says we need to be willing to do anything short of sin to reach the people who don't know Christ. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, but I just thought that was such a glaring statement that was like, dang, that's cool. I like that. That's good. Anything short of sin to reach people who don't know Christ. To reach the people that no one is reaching, we have to do things that no one is doing. And so this is a great way for us to kind of get started today as we start to think about a little bit more. If you're new with us, or you haven't been here in a while, we're in a series called Jesus as We, and we've been exploring some of the values that our church really holds dear. Pastor talked in week 1 about how important it is to make sure that we are big thinking, that we are risk-taking in what we do here at First Church. And I would hope that you would agree that there is this momentum that is happening in our church where we're taking risks all the time. About, I don't know if I'm even allowed to say this, so hopefully I won't get in trouble, but the facility and finance team didn't have a balanced budget, and they said, you know what, we're going to put our faith in God over this next $30,000 to $40,000 that we don't have an answer for next year, just taking a risk on God and saying, this is what God is going to do. He's going to provide as he's done each and every year. We're going to be risk takers, and that's exactly what our church is doing. And then in week 2, Pastor Tom talked about serving, about not being spiritual consumers, but to be spiritual contributors. Because the church doesn't exist for us. It exists for God. And then last week he talked about this extravagant generosity, not financially, not putting money in the offering plate or anything, but to give out of your resources, to give because we know that it's more blessed to give than to receive, right? It's not even Christmas that we're talking about. How about it's more blessed to give than receive? Well, today we're going to talk about the value of reaching people who are far from God. And so we're going to talk about that. If you have your Bibles and you want to follow along, we're going to be on Mark chapter 2 the entire day. That's it. Mark chapter 2. We're going to start at the end, though, of the chapter, and then we'll go back and give you a little preface of what Miss Gardner just read. Was this moment in which Jesus does a really kind of a radical thing. You want to talk about taking risks? There he was. I love telling students all the time, hey, you really want to be a rebel in your school? You want to be like the outcast and follow Jesus because nobody is doing that, all right? Be a rebel in your school because Jesus was the ultimate rebel. And he goes out and he heals this guy. He just healed this guy, and then he goes to Levi, or other passages say that his name is Matthew, and he changed his name. You guys know Matthew from the book of Matthew. He becomes one of the disciples, and he says, he's a very simple tax collector, and he calls to Levi and he says, follow me. And to the shock of the religious people everywhere, Matthew does just that. He gets up, he leaves his booth, and he follows Jesus. And then afterwards, he not only does he just follow Jesus, he decides he's going to make a big deal about this. Hey, I'm following Jesus now. Jesus has received me, this rabbi, this teacher, this great man, has received me to be one of his friends, one of his people, to call me into his life. I'm going to have a party, and I'm going to invite everybody else I know, all my other tax collector friends and my unrighteous friends, and so we're just going to have a party. And so this is where they are at this house, with some very questionable people and sinners. And the Pharisees and the religious people, man, they are highly offended by this, right? They're like, oh, why does this Jesus eat with sinners? I mean, that's how religious people say it, right? Oh, I can't believe this person would be with sinners. I don't remember how long ago it was, but I remember preaching a Sunday morning, and I told you about how my grandmother, who was pregnant, walked into a bar. She was pregnant with my oldest aunt, and she walked into a bar. She was just hopeless. But there was a guy from the local church who followed her into that bar, willing to go and do something, take a risk. Not a place where a lot of church people are at and hang out. They don't typically go to bars. But when he saw this woman go in, he said, I have to follow. I have to share the love. I have to go into this place full of the unrighteous to be able to minister to this woman and say, there is hope in Jesus, not in the drink. And so these religious people, how can this guy eat with sinners? How can this guy go into this bar to minister to this woman? And his response was so controversial, it's even controversial to this day. I'm going to read again, Mark chapter 2, verse 13. It says, once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach. And as he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, Jesus told him. And Levi got up and followed him. Now, when Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners, I love how they put that in quotes, so that you are actually able to catch that. We're eating with him and his disciples, for there were so many who followed him. And the teachers of the law and the Pharisees saw them eating with sinners and tax collectors, that they asked the disciples, why does this guy, why does your rabbi, why does your teacher hang out with these sinners? On hearing this, Jesus says to them, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but to call who? Sinners. That's right. So here's what he says. On hearing this, Jesus says, he says, why are you eating with sinners? And he says, well, it's not the healthy who need a doctor. Who is it, church? Who needs the doctor? The sick, right? So his next line totally throws them off kilter even more. Some people might even call it heresy or blasphemy when he says, listen, I have not come to call the righteous. What? Come on, I'm a church person. I do everything you tell me to do, Jesus. I'm trying to be a good Christian. I'm trying to do everything that God tells me to do. I'm trying to be a father on the wall. I'm trying to make sure that I represent you well. Well, I'm not calling you. I'm not here for you right now. I'm here for the sinners. And it's so emotional, this idea that we don't have to have it all together to be able to be called by God for anything. He doesn't come for the healthy, he came for the sick. He didn't come for those who think they were already righteous. He came for those who were sinners. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Coming and going to those who are not righteous, but those who need the doctor, those who are sick. And so we're going to look at this very powerful story in Mark chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. You can kind of flip over there if you're in your Bible. And I want to read this to you, and then we'll go through a little bit more. But it says in chapter 2, verse 1, a few days later, when Jesus entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. So many gathered there that there was no room left, not even outside the door. And he preached the word to them. Some men came bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 of them. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus, and after digging through it, lowered the mat, and the paralyzed man was on. Then Jesus saw their faith, and he says to the paralytic, son, your sins are forgiven. Now notice before Jesus heals the guy, he eventually does. We're not even going to look at that today, but the most important part is what he does first. His biggest need was his spiritual need, not his physical. We're going to talk today about reaching people. Do you guys know what our Methodist mission statement is? It says, to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. You guys have heard this before? Yes? Can you say it with me? Can we say it together? To make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Do it one more time. Do it. To make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. So our mission first, the first part of that, our mission first is to make disciples of Jesus. Right? That's our mission. How many of you guys remember that? When you stood up here and Pastor Tom says, hey, do you renounce the forces of sin? Do you want to, and I, do you become Methodist? Do you want to be ready to make disciples? You guys remember that? You were like, oh yeah, sign me up? Or did you like, whoa? I thought I was just going to get a nice cushy seat in the pew on Sunday morning, listen to the choir, get a nice lift me up before I go. What do you mean to make disciples? What do you mean? That's the motto of the United Methodist Church. The mission. I believe all of us are called, who are Christ followers, are called to love people into a relationship with Jesus, to make disciples of Jesus Christ. So we're going to talk about two big thoughts. And if you're taking notes, here's the first one. The first thing I believe is that God calls all of us who are Jesus followers to bear some burdens. Come on, Tony. Now you're getting all that service stuff again. You're talking about, come on, I want to be comfortable. I don't want to have to take up other people's burdens. Are you kidding me? To care, but I want to say, listen, as a Christ follower, we have to care for those who are out of place, who are hurt, who are in need, and they need love in their lives. And this is what happens in verse 3. If you look again at Mark's Gospel, this is what it says. Some men came bringing Jesus, a paralyzed man, carried by 4 of them. They brought him to Jesus. 2 Tuesdays ago was my 19th wedding anniversary. My wife and I, we went out to dinner. And then while we were at dinner, we were like, you know what? You want to go see a movie? And she was like, yeah, let's do it. So we kind of looked up on our phone and we found this movie called The Greatest Showman. I didn't know much about it. But I said, hey, we could probably catch this show if we kind of hurry up and pay our bill and we can go. And so she said, let's do it. So we went and we saw the movie. And it was great. It was really great. We went home, and the people who were sitting with Ella, they said, you know, we said, hey, thanks so much for hanging out with Ella. By now, she's in bed. It was a school night, you know. But I says, hey, thanks for sitting with her. And she said, hey, I just want to let you know that Ella has a message for you. I'm like, oh, I didn't know you were her secretary. I said, great, thank you. What's the message? And she says, she wanted me to tell you that if you went to go see The Greatest Showman without her, she was going to cut you off. Like, you're out of the will. I'm like, she's 11. I don't understand. But apparently my daughter was more in tune to the coolness of this movie than I was, because her friends had been talking about it in school. Some of her friends had seen it and were actually singing songs. Like, my daughter even knew songs from the movie. So I love the movie so much. Like, on the way home from seeing it, I downloaded the soundtrack. I'd been listening to it already. Just really loved it. So when I heard that my daughter really wanted to see it, I'm like, great, let's go again and see it on Friday. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, boom, Friday, we were back in the theater again. Me, my wife, my daughter Ella, and she brought her friend Emma. And the 4 of us saw it. I was kind of sitting in the chair, kind of waiting for the movie to start. And I clicked on Facebook and checked into the movie theater and said, take 2, I get to see it again, you know? And I noticed that after I'm done, I look at my responses to my post, and it says, and there's a angry face by my friend Matt. And I was like, why is he mad? And he's like, dude, I wanted to see that movie. Matt to go see the movie again. And we invited Timmy along, who's our co-worship leader for second service. So 3 of us in the theater, late at night, dark, alone. It was just the 3 of us, 3 dudes, right? And no one else was there. Watching a musical. And I'd go see it again. I just loved it that much. But here's the point. I think a lot of times we live our Christian lives that way. You know, we might get really, really excited about our faith or about what Christ is doing in our life, but we have already made this judgment to say, well, I don't think I'm going to tell my people, my friends, or my family about my love for Christ because, well, it might offend them, especially in this day and age. Man, I'm sorry, when people get offended over anything. What? You're happy about Jesus? I'm offended, right? So we get very kind of tensed up about this idea of sharing our faith with people. You know what? Some of us are brave. We still post it. We kind of still share a little bit. And then maybe God gives us this little nudge and puts people in your life that really needs to know more about Jesus. They really need to know that they need to become a disciple of Jesus Christ, like our mission statement says. So there's 3 ways that we could respond to that person, right? We could tell them about Jesus and all the great things that we like about Jesus, and all the great songs that we get to sing and hear, and stories we could tell them. Or we could say, number 2, hey, you need to go to church. You should go to church, experience it for yourself. It's going to be awesome. I'm sure there's a church where you are. Check out Google it. You're going to find a church. It's going to be great. You could tell them to go see church and experience it for themselves. Or you could do the 3rd thing. You could bring them to church. You could go with them. And I don't mean just like go with them. I mean like go pick them up. I mean like put them in your car an hour before church, grab a coffee and a donut from Dunkin' Donuts, sit with them in church, bring them to church. That's what these people did. The friends in our pastors just didn't say, hey, I hear there's this guy Jesus in town. I know you're paralyzed, but you should go see him. They didn't do that. What they did was they got involved in this man's life. And they said, man, we're going to get you there. Not because we want to get you to Jesus. We need to get you to Jesus. We have to get you to Jesus. That could have been a 5-mile walk. I don't know. Carrying your buddy. We care. They're saying to him, listen, we care about you enough to do this, to carry you. And so one of the biggest weaknesses, I believe, in our church today is when it comes to Christians sharing their faith. You guys know what a drive-by shooting is? I mean, horrible thing, right? People roll down the window, they shoot. I think sometimes, though, Christians are a little guilty of, like, drive-by witnessing. It's like, you roll down the window, it's like, hey, Jesus loves you, come to my church. Or some guy, he's like, gets the John 3:16 sign at the football game and says, hey, I was on the Jumbotron, I just witnessed today, right? That's sometimes we get into this thing, well, now I'm a witness because I told somebody to come to my church. But that's not what it is. You can't just roll down your window and say, Jesus loves you. You need to, this is so important. You can write this down if you want. People need to know that you care about them, that you're not trying to convert them to something. They just need to know that you care about them. So you may say, listen, I don't even know enough to share my faith. I don't know enough about my faith to share it. And there's this old saying that I love. It says that people don't care about how much you know. Right? Anybody know the rest? They want to know how much you care. It's not about what you know. It's about how much you care about them and that you love them. And so we as Jesus followers, we have to carry some burdens. We have to bear some burdens. And they said, we're going to carry him to Jesus. And that's what I like about this. They carry their friend. We don't want to just invite people to church. We want to bring them to church. You want to know how to do that? Talk to Ham Askew. Ham Askew has physically, and they've never had chains on them at all. But he has physically brought people to church over and over throughout the years that I have been here. And people's lives are changed because of it. And they recognize because of his care for them and his love for them that they also want to experience this love and grace from our loving God and from his son Jesus. And what's stunning to me is to think about this picture. Here you have these friends that approach this house and it's completely packed. This idea that they were so full that they were outside peeking in windows and doorways. They're so jam-packed and listening to these 4 guys come and they're trying to get into the house, but they can't because it's just so full of people listening to Jesus. I don't blame them. That's where I would want to be. I'll be like, hey, Jesus, can I get a selfie with you, please? Because that's how much, hey, it's great to be. You guys wouldn't be here if you didn't love Jesus and you didn't want to be a part of what Jesus has to say and what Jesus has done in your life. There's no doubt that they weren't doing anything wrong by cramming into this house. But sometimes, this visual here, sometimes I see as church people, we're so immersed and so focused on doing our little Christian thing that the entire time our back are to those who need help the most. And we got to be careful that doesn't happen to us. We got to be careful that we're not so inward focused that we have our back to the people who are hurting the most and need Jesus more than ever. Remember, Jesus came for the sick. He came for the sinners. And so they take the next step. I keep changing the page on my thing. I don't even know I'm doing it. I believe in all my heart that we're called to bear some burdens. People are hurting and we're here with them. You guys can tell me stories, I'm sure, about, when your friend's mom dies. You don't just text them and say, oh, I'm sorry about your mom. No, you go to their funeral. You cry with them. When your friend has a baby, you go to the baby shower and you celebrate this new life with them. That's what you do. You live life with them. When they are in need, we bear some burdens. And then, once we bear those burdens, guess what? This is so big. At this point in time, you earn the right to be heard. I was telling some friends just recently, I said, I think the church has changed quite a bit in the sense that years and years and years ago, the church really didn't need your permission to speak into your life. I mean, hundreds of years ago, if the church told you what to do and you didn't do it, well, you were, like my daughter, cut people out. Right? You weren't allowed to be in the community. You weren't allowed to go and to be in the stuff that's going on in the church. They excommunicated you. But today, in this day and age, you don't have permission. The church does not have permission to speak into anyone's life. And you certainly don't either. Until you receive that permission from the person that you want to share your faith with. That's why drive-by witnessing doesn't work. Because you don't have the permission to speak into people's lives anymore. But once you bear those burdens, you earn the right to be heard. There's this story about this girl, Amber, that Craig Rochelle shares. And I know it's about somebody from his church, but I just really want to share it because I really thought it was cool. But Amber is this real estate agent, and she really needed a contract. She needed to close, and she kind of had this breakthrough deal for her. She actually was making 3 commissions off one family. But the sad part of the story is the reason she was making 3 commissions off of this family is because there was a couple that was divorcing. And so she was selling their house, and she'd already had the house picked out for both him and her to sell them. And so they were going to get 3 commissions in basically one deal. I mean, that's a deal breaker for her house, for her family, right? She actually had kind of already thought through she was going to make $12,000 off of this one family. And then all of a sudden, she went to church, and she heard about this book for marriages called From This Day Forward. It is by Craig Rochelle. I bought it on Wednesday. I read it on Thursday. Great book. It's for singles and it's for married people. I wouldn't recommend the book unless I read it. It's actually even kind of changed some of the things I'm doing in my own marriage to make sure that I'm living a godly lifestyle for my own wife and my own family, and not becoming another statistic of 1 in 2 marriages fail. But she hears about this book, and she says to herself, I know this couple that's going through a lot. Maybe I should just buy them this book. Now, personally, I would say, but if I give them this book, and God does something awesome with their marriage, I'm out $12,000, right? I'm being real with you. That's what I was thinking. But Amber wasn't thinking that. She went right past this, didn't even think about it. And she says, listen, guys, I know you're divorcing, but I have this book I just want you to read. And sure enough, he read it on his own, she read it on her own, and God did something amazing. By the grace of God, He changed their hearts, and their marriage started to heal. They ended up not selling their house. And their marriage is thriving today. She lost 3 commissions. But God used her to do something incredible. Something radical, something special. And what Craig says, the really cool thing is that after she lost those 3 commissions, the next week she got 3 new contracts. You don't think God honors people when they go to make disciples of Jesus Christ? You don't think God is going to be with you? That affirmation of faith that we read this morning about how he is with us in all things. So when you put someone else's well-being ahead of your own, man, we're going to have to bear some burdens. And I don't know about you, but there's people who are hurting, and probably in your own life, that you have to help bear their burdens. They might be in a place where they're so hurting so bad, they feel like they're in a living, just terrible place. But you can help them into a better place. And I believe that's why God calls us to bear burdens. We don't want to just get people to Jesus. We have to get people to Jesus. The second thing, and some of you probably might like this one, bearing burdens, yes, but we're going to have to break some rules too. You guys like, all right, I'm with you now. I just woke up. What'd you say? Break some rules, right? I'm kind of a rule follower. I hate to break rules. I always kind of want to try to do my best, but sometimes there's just some things I had to do. Like, I don't necessarily drive the speed limit. I know I'm alone on this. I know nobody here speeds, but I break that rule all the time. I know that. I remember when I was a kid, I would sleep on the floor in the back of my car, or in my mom's car. Like, you didn't have to worry about seatbelts back then because your mom was your seatbelt. Remember that? If you stopped, she went bam! Like, I just saw arms all across this room do the same thing, right? Your mom was your seatbelt, right? So I didn't wear seatbelts necessarily when I was a kid. I know when I moved out, I ran with scissors. It was just great. Like, Mom, check me out with a lollipop in my mouth, right, at the same time, and a plastic bag on my head. I was just breaking rules all over the place. It was a party. But here's the problem. In this story, we see 4 guys that realize they have to break some rules in order to get this person to Jesus. They massively break rules. Verse 4, these guys, they since they couldn't get their buddy to Jesus because of this crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus by digging through it, and they lowered the mat the man was laying on. We got to get our friend to Jesus. We have to. People are listening. We can't get in. Let's go up on the roof and dig a hole. And they did it. Now, I did, Craig earlier, he did some research on how these roofs were made, and they typically would have these posts that were about 3 feet apart, and then the roof was actually made of mud, of fat, and actually they used manure in there to seal up the roof, because what else happened is that it held it all together, but the manure actually worked as a fertilizer, and a lot of these places grew grass on top of their homes, and they would go up there and put up laundry and have family time there, and go up there and take naps. So here are these 4 guys that are on top of the roof, and I don't know how they dug through it. I don't know if one guy said, hey, we might need a shovel for this adventure. I don't know, but my guess is probably not. Probably they took what they had at that point in time, and they started to dig with their hands, right? They started to dig this hole. Now, you remember what the roof was made out of, right? Well, maybe sometimes we just have to dig through a little manure to get someone to Jesus. We have to go through some of that job. So, here they are breaking into this guy's house through the roof. Insurance isn't going to cover it. But they get up there and they get to the point, and there they are. They say, we're going to have to lower this guy down. We're gonna get him down there. Well, what if we drop him? He's already paralyzed. We don't need it. It's okay. Let's get him down there. That was terrible. I'm sorry. Please don't hashtag that. Please, that was terrible. But they bring him down, and what I love about these guys is that they are not taking obstacles as a sign from God that this isn't supposed to happen. Isn't that true sometimes? The church is like, well, the door's closing on this adventure. Maybe we just need to stop. Or maybe God doesn't want us to do this. God doesn't want you to bring people to Jesus? No! And so they go through and they do whatever it takes to get people to Jesus. I mean, we got crazy people in our church that do this all the time. I mean, how many times do you hear people about, giving, I heard one time about a pastor who gave someone in the congregation his van. And it disappeared for like weeks. He was on CNN and everything. Like, who in the world would be crazy enough to give your van to a stranger? Right? But this pastor, man, he was going to break some rules. He was like, hey, I'm going to trust in God in this. I'm going to do this. If you're too new, that was Pastor Tom, by the way. I just want to make sure that's clear. He's got jokes up here during his announcement time. I'll give him that. But now I'm celebrating his faith. I mean, he's new to a church. He doesn't know everybody here. Yeah, here's my van. Go. Are you kidding me? You got to break some rules sometimes. Do whatever you can. Do whatever it's going to take. There's this guy, this Christian guy, his name was Brent. And Brent, who owns a company, he actually employs convicted felons. He works with them. And they're kind of like on a work release. They're in prison. They got the little monitors on their feet and stuff. But they work for Brent. He's willing to do some things that people aren't doing. Brent is taking some initiative and breaking some rules. So here's the key. To reach people no one's reaching, we're going to have to do things that no one's doing. We're going to do some things in our churches that normally we don't do, and we're going to have to do them all the time. What do you mean we're offering another free thing to the community? I can't keep buying hot dogs! I believe with all my heart the church should be the most creative, innovative organization around. We can do this. You know, hundreds of years ago, this was the case. Do you know that a couple centuries back, the church was the center of the city? Everybody went to the church. The church, it was the epicenter. The church drove the arts at this point in time. But somewhere along the way, we delegated innovation to Apple and said, you can take that. Or we handed off creativity to Hollywood. Or we said Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you can have relationships. And then we allowed the government to meet the needs of the poor. And we are the best and most equipped organization to do all of that plus more. And that's why I believe that we must stop going to church and start being the church. As for the church, we recognize Jesus didn't come for the healthy, he came for the sick. And that we are all sick, and we all need his grace. And when we recognize who he is and what he's done, our only reasonable response is to give him our whole entire life. Everything that we have. And if this doesn't excite you, then you must not have been saved for much. Because I was the product of a dad who, as soon as he found out my mom was pregnant, said, abort him. By the grace of God, my mom had enough sense and enough people around her to help make her a disciple to say no. My mom always reminds me the amount of people that I've had the opportunity to pour into their lives. Hundreds and hundreds of students, parents, church friends, family. She says, do you think the world would be a different place if you weren't here? Do you think the world would be a different place if you don't break some rules? Or do you think you could do some amazing things for the gospel? Jesus says, I am the light of the world. We have to be a church that does not judge those who are without Christ, but loves them. To know the grace of Jesus. I see a church full of people who bear some burdens and get messy and get dirty and get involved with people's lives, who will break some rules, who start to dig through and go through some crap with some people in order to get them to Jesus. I see a church full of people who knows what it means to be sick, who knows what it means to be healed. Jesus has saved you. You have come out of the salvage yard through salvation in Jesus. He has made you new. I feel like this sermon's all about Matt today, but Matt just bought a car out of a junkyard because he wants to restore it and make it new. Well, God has purchased you through his son Jesus to restore you and make you new. That's what salvation means. And despite the fact that you are a sinner, you are forgiven. When you know that by the grace of Jesus, then we need to do anything short of sin to reach people who don't know Christ. We need to reach people no one's reaching. We will do things no one is doing because God is calling us to lead people to become fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.